So Pirkei Avos, we're in chapter 4, and we're beginning with Mishna Tes Zayin 16, according to my count. And it's a very short Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, have a Zahir b'Talmud. Be careful in Talmud and learning and study. Sheshigigas Talmud ola zadon. Because an error in study, in the translation from Safaria, it says counts as deliberate sin. It can also be read as will lead to deliberate sin. So be careful in learning because a mistake in learning can either lead to deliberate sin or will be counted as deliberate sin. What is this Mishnah telling us? So the Midrash Shmuel, in his first approach, suggests something I think is very, very fundamental. And he says that one has to be careful in what they learn to try not to forget it. And the reason is because Avera goreres Avera. One transgression leads to another transgression. And if perhaps at first we erred because we forgot something that we had learned, but at some point we'll reach the point where we are intentional and deliberate and no longer care to do what's correct. And what he's really expressing is an idea in Chazal, in the sages, in the Gemara, that if a person sins once or twice, so then it becomes permitted in their eyes. They basically become desensitized to it. So, and I think this is just, we look around the world and this is the case. If we grew up doing certain things, then in our eyes, it's fine because we're used to it. We may one day learn that there's something we should be doing differently. Maybe we even are strong enough to change, to take on something different. If we then forget what we've learned and we go back to our old ways, then again, it becomes rote, becomes acceptable in our eyes. We become desensitized. And he brings a very interesting proof to this or example of this. And it comes from a verse in Devarim, and I think it's in Parshas Va'aschanan, and it's the commandment to remember what happened at Sinai. So we are probably more used to a commandment to remember the Exodus, Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we do many things to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim all over the Torah. We have mitzvos that are to remember the Exodus, but actually the Torah also says, Hishamer lecha. One should be careful, pentishkachas advarim asher ra'u einacha, lest you forget what your eyes saw, upen yasuru milavavcha kol yemei chayacha, and lest you remove from your heart all the days of your life. And what is it that you're supposed to remember? Yom asher amat lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'chorev, the day that you stood before Hashem at Har Sinai. And this is counted by many as one or two of the 613 mitzvahs, to remember what happened at Sinai and not to forget it. But the Midrash Shmuel zeroes in on the words and reads them carefully. It says, be careful lest you forget what your eyes saw and lest you remove from your heart. So that sounds like something almost intentional, to remove it from your heart. And he says that first you'll forget and then you'll deliberately remove it from your heart. And I think really what the depths of what he's saying is that we, again, are not so careful sometimes. We forget and we do something we shouldn't have done. And then it might happen again. And eventually we reach the point where we need to justify it to ourselves. And either we rationalize and we come up with our own rationalizations, but the ultimate rationalization is to just forget about Sinai, right? Is to just remove what happened at Sinai from our hearts, to forget that the Torah it comes from Hashem. It's Hashem's will and Hashem's word, and and at the very root of any rationalization for ignoring something that we've learned would be to say, well, is it really so important? Well, if we remember that it comes from Sinai, then yes, it's really so important. So at the roots of it, we have to kind of ignore that the Torah was given by God at Sinai. So, so in that verse, it says, remember what your eyes saw, lest you bring yourself to forget it, because at some point, to rationalize our behavior, we would have to just convince ourselves to ignore that Hashem gave the Torah at Sinai. So he invokes that as an example of this, but I think it's really like gets to the root of it. A person has to be so careful in their learning to try to hold on to what they've learned. They have to be careful to learn in the first place, to know what to do, to know how to act, how to conduct ourselves. Because once we make a mistake, once we forget how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to conduct ourselves, what we're supposed to do, then it will lead us down a path where we'll just deliberately do what's against the Torah's will, what's against Hashem's will, and then we'll have to justify it to ourselves. We'll have to rationalize, and that's what the Mishnah here is warning us. Have a zayir b'talmud. Be careful in our study, meaning to try to remember what we've learned in terms of putting it into action, because otherwise it will lead to zadon. It will lead to deliberate sin, where we need to then, once we're used to it, we're desensitized, then we will continue on that path, and then we'll just have to rationalize it to ourselves, justify it to ourselves. Okay, that is approach number one in this Mishnah. A second approach, the Midrash Shmuel says, is that we need to be careful in our learning, because be careful in study to be able to learn from anybody. To be able to learn from anybody, right? Like it says elsewhere in Pirkei Avos that who is wise, one who learns from any person. But at times it's hard. It's hard to be willing to listen to certain people. And sometimes it takes a great amount of humility to be able to listen to certain people. But if we are not willing to do that, then we're going to miss out on learning. We're going to miss out on taking lessons and putting them to action. And so an error in study that comes as a result of not being willing to learn from someone, that's olazadon, that's considered deliberate sin, because it was really our choice not to learn from them. It was a decision to not learn from somebody, and therefore we lack in knowledge. And so while the end result may have been, somebody will say, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know that there was another way to do this. I didn't know what the right path was. But if it came as a result of not being willing to learn from someone or willing to listen, then it's really our choice, and it's considered as if we deliberately sinned. So approach number two here is that when it says be careful in your learning, it means be careful in your study, be careful to be willing to learn from anyone, because if we make an error as a result of not being willing to learn from someone, then that's really almost like a deliberate sin, because it was our choice not to learn from someone. Okay, a third way to read this Mishnah flips the script, turns it around on the teacher. And instead of when it says be careful but Talmud, translating it as be careful in study, it could mean be careful in how we teach. And actually some versions of the Mishnah have a zahir bit talmid, be careful with your students. And this could be interpreted in multiple ways. One of them is be careful with the words that we use when we teach. meaning be clear, be direct, be clear, and don't say something that could be interpreted in multiple ways or misinterpreted, because the mistakes, the errors in study that can come from a lack of clarity in one's teaching. So that is almost like a deliberate sin, because the teacher could have been more careful. He could have been more careful, he or she, to speak clearly, to define things better, to explain things better. And they weren't careful. They just said things. Maybe they didn't have a full understanding themselves. Often, if a teacher is unclear, it means they don't really understand. And that also means at times they didn't prepare properly. So, so the Mishnah could be speaking to the teacher and saying, Havizar b'Talmud, be careful in how you teach, in the words that you use, and how you explain things, because mistakes that come as a result of your teaching, mistakes that the students make because they misinterpret what you say, that's like a deliberate sin on the part of the teacher for not preparing properly, for not speaking clearly, for not being clear. On a similar note, you could say that when it says be careful, if we read it as be careful with your Talmud, with your student, Havizar b'Talmud, be careful with your student. So it could be that it's related to the previous Mishnah. The previous Mishnah was the teaching of Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, who said that the honor of your student should be as dear as your own. And continuing in that vein, Rabbi Yehuda says, be careful in how you speak to your students. Be careful to treat your students with respect. Be careful to honor them, just like it said in the previous Mishnah. But now it tells us, because you know what can happen if you don't treat them with respect? So then they might make a mistake in how they relate back to you. Sheshigigas Talmid, again, if we have this version that says Talmid instead of Talmud. So be careful with your Talmid, with your student, because the mistake of a student is like a deliberate sin, meaning if a person doesn't speak properly and respectfully to their students, inevitably the students aren't going to respect the teacher. They're going to say something out of line. They're going to insult them. They're going to speak lashon hara about them. It's going to lead the student to sin, and and that in other words, a mistake that the student makes is going to be like a zadon, like a deliberate sin on behalf of the student. You're going to lead them down a path where they're going to say something wrong or speak lashon hara, and this in this interpretation, it's continuing in the path of the previous Mishnah in terms of how we have to treat our students. Have a zayir b'Talmud. Be careful in how you treat your students, because otherwise you will cause the student to err in how they treat you, and that'll be like a deliberate sin on their behalf. And finally, one last interpretation of the Mishnah, and then we'll summarize. Finally, he says another explanation, really going back to the first approach, that it just means be careful in how we learn. It could mean be careful in what we learn. Be careful what we learn, because there are areas of Torah that we're just not ready for. And certain, Kabbalah or philosophy, there are certain areas of Torah that if we try to go down that path, then it could lead us to kefira, to heresy. We might misunderstand, and therefore be careful, be thoughtful, and deliberate in what we decide that is appropriate for us to learn. Because the mistake that we make in what we learn could lead us to intentional sin. If we delve into an area that we're not ready for, or we don't have the right teacher for, or is just beyond our understanding, then it could lead to misunderstanding, and it can lead to misunderstandings of Hashem, Hashem's ways, of how Hashem runs the world, and that can lead a person ultimately to just leave the path and to deliberate sin. So this last interpretation says, be careful, Habizar b'Talmud, be careful in what you learn, because an error in what you learn can end up leading a person down the wrong path to deliberate sin. So I think we came out with 5 interpretations of this Mishnah. You could group 3 of them together and then two of them together. The first 2 and the last one all read the Mishnah as be careful in how you learn or what you learn. Be careful in how you learn, either be careful not to forget, because if you forget something, if you forget how to conduct yourself, then after a few times it becomes natural to do the wrong thing, and then we start to justify and rationalize. It leads to deliberate sin. Alternatively, it could be careful in who you learn from, meaning be willing to learn from anybody, because if we're not willing to learn from anybody, then we will miss out. We'll miss out, and that will lead us to we'll be lacking in our knowledge, and it will be by our choice because we chose. Well, I can't listen to that person if we don't have the right respect, and really each person has something to teach us. I think there is a flip side of this, which is really the third interpretation, which is it's not quite the case. I wouldn't say you can learn from anybody. Although there's what to learn from anybody, sometimes what to learn is what not to do or what not to say or what not to think. So the third interpretation really, I think, has to be discussed along with the second interpretation, which is be careful. The third interpretation is be careful in what you learn. Don't learn areas of Torah that are beyond us and are going to just confuse us and could lead us down the wrong path of understanding to the point where a person starts to deny God or deny God's the way God conducts himself in the world. And I think along the same lines, we could say be careful in who you learn from, because although we say it's good to learn from everybody, but there are certain people that maybe we recognize as they're not gonna lead us down the right path. And then on the other hand, it could be speaking to the teacher. Be careful with your students. Either be careful with your words in being clear, in teaching clearly, making sure that you've prepared the material enough that you understand it and you can give it over with clarity. Because otherwise, if you leave something up to interpretation, a student misunderstands and takes something the wrong way, and that could lead to sin. Or be careful in how we speak to our students, speak to them respectfully, because if not, then we turn them off. Besides for that, it's bad on its own, but we also can make them react to us and treat the teacher with disrespectfully, and that's also a path that we don't want to go down. Okay, that is Mishnah Tes Zayin. Now we're moving to Yud Zayin, Mishnah 17. Mishnah Yud Zayin, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, Shlosha kisarim heim. There are 3 crowns. Keser Torah, the Keser Kahuna, the Keser Malchus. There's the crown of Torah. There's the crown of Kahuna, of priesthood, like from the word Kohen. The Keser Malchus, and the crown of kingship, like the word Melech, Malchus. The Keser Shem Tov Ola al Gaber, and the crown of a good name, here we translate it, supersedes them all, Ola al Gaber, and goes on top of all of them. So let's count that again. There are 3 crowns. There's the crown of Torah, there's the crown of Kahuna, of priesthood, there's the crown of kingship, and the crown of a good name goes on top of all of them. So how many crowns are there? 4, right? Yet the Mishnah says there's 3. So clearly the Mishnah wants you to know, no, there's really only 3. So how do we understand this Mishnah, which says there are 3 and then tells us 4? So it seems that the 4th one doesn't count for some reason. It's not one of the 3. There are 3 crowns and then there's a 4th. So the Midrash Shmuel has a number of suggestions for how to reconcile this. The first suggestion is that the crown of a good name is in a league of its own. There's 3 crowns that are regular, and then there's a crown of a good name, which is completely in a league of its own. It doesn't even get listed in the original count. Okay, that's one suggestion. Second suggestion is that obviously, in order to say that a person has the crown of Torah, right? What does that mean even? Like a person who's filled with Torah, a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, if they conduct themselves like royalty, I don't mean in an arrogant way, but in a proper way, then Torah is a crown. But only if they have a good name with it. Meaning if part of that, Torah will only be a crown to a person if they also have a good name. I don't mean a good name what do we mean by a good name? We mean people look up to them. They recognize, they look at such a person and they say, that's a good person. That's a good name. So in order for Torah to be a crown, the person also has to have a good name. And the same is true for the crown of priesthood. A person is a Kohen if they're born a Kohen, but for them to say that it's a crown for them, that it's something that makes them unique and special, but they have to also attain some of that on their own, attain a good name. And the same for a king, or maybe a person in a position of authority. So that could be a crown for them if they take responsibility and they're a leader, but only if they are recognized as a good person with a good name. So in other words, really what it would be saying is there's three crowns. There's the crown of Torah, there's the crown of priesthood, and there's the crown of kingship. And the crown of a good name is Ol al Gabeh. It means it's on top of all of them, meaning all of them have to have that in order to be considered a crown. If you don't have a good name, then you don't have a crown of Torah. If you don't have a good name, you don't have a crown of priesthood or a crown of kingship, of leadership. Okay, so that's another explanation. Now, if that's the case, let's assume like the second explanation, that when it says that the crown of a good name goes on top of all of them, meaning all of these to be a crown have to also come with a good name. So then which of the three crowns is the highest crown? Is it the crown of Torah? Is it the crown of priesthood, or is it the crown of kingship? So there's actually a beautiful allusion to these three crowns in the Torah itself and in the Mishkan. Because in the Mishkan, there were three vessels that the Torah describes as having a zer. And a zer is a crown. It was kind of like these jagged points going around three of the golden vessels of the Mishkan. One was the Aron, the ark. One was the shulchan, the table where the breads were kept. And one was the Mizbeach HaKetoris, the golden altar that was used for the Ketoris, for the incense. So three vessels in the Mishkan had a zer, had a crown going around them, and these three vessels correspond to these three forms of kingship. The Aron, the ark, housed the luchos, the two tablets, as well as a Sefer Torah inside. So the Aron, the ark, represents Torah, and therefore the crown around the ark represents the crown of Torah. The shulchan, which had the bread, sustenance, provision, that represents kingship. The king would be the provider for the nation. At the end of the day, responsible for making sure the nation has what they need. And so the shulchan, the table in the Mishkan, which had the bread on it, represents the crown of kingship. And then the altar of incense, the Mizbeach HaKetoris, that's kahuna, that's the priesthood, that's where the Ketoris was brought as an offering to God. And that represents the crown of priesthood. Now, the shulchan, the table, which corresponds to the crown of kingship, and the Mizbeach HaKetoris, the incense altar, which represents the crown of priesthood, those were in the Heichal, in the outer chamber of the Mishkan. and the Beis Hamikdash, and the ark was inside the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. So you see that that's the greatest crown. The crown that's inside the Kodesh HaKodashim and the Holy of Holies, that's the greatest crown, and that is the crown of Torah. Some commentaries point out that it was only because of the Torah that they had that the Kohanim merited priesthood, and that the line of David merited kingship. That Aaron HaKohen merited priesthood because of the Torah that he had, and King David, David HaMelech, merited kingship because of the Torah that he had. So the crown of Torah precedes is necessary even to achieve the other types of crowns. That's the most important. And and some understand, Midrash Shmuel brings one interpretation, that when it says Keser Shem Tov Olal Gabein, that the crown of a good name goes on all of them, that's actually a reference specifically to Torah. So it says there's three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. And the crown of a good name is on top of all three, meaning of the three, the crown of a good name is the best. And what's the good name? That refers to Torah, because Torah is called a lekach tov. Ki lekach tov nasati lachem. I've given you a good acquisition. And so the Torah is called Tov. And so the Shem Tov, the good name, that's a reference to the Torah. That's on top of all the other three. So that's one way to read it. You don't have to read it that way. But in any event, you have these three crowns, and and like I said before, I think to me the simple and most meaningful explanation is that each of these is only a crown if it's coupled with a Shem Tov, with a good name. And what the Mishnah is bringing out with that when it says that a good name is on top of all of them, is that we need to, all of the things that we do, all of the mitzvahs, all of the service of God, whether it's Torah or it's kahuna, it's types of avoda, of service, it's all should be done in a way that brings a person a good name, meaning that people look at that person and they say, wow, that's what a person should be. That's what can be achieved by learning Torah and doing mitzvos. That's actually the language of the Gemara when it says, what's a Kiddush Hashem? How do we define a Kiddush Hashem? So it describes that the way we sanctify God's name is we conduct ourselves in a way that people look at that person and they say, wow, that person's so fortunate that they were able to learn Torah because look how they conduct ourselves. That's what a good name is. That's what a Shem Tov is. And that's what each of us should be striving for. Okay, and then on the flip side, meaning up till now we've kind of been talking to each of us as what we should be striving for. I think, well, that raises a good point. We can't really strive to be a Kohen, right? That's not really, if you're not a Kohen, then you're not a Kohen. You also can't really strive to be a king. So elsewhere it's pointed out that the crown of Torah, I think later in Pirkei Avos, is available for everybody. So in terms of striving, the crown of Torah is out there and available for any person to just come and take by investing themselves in their Torah study. Now on the flip side of things, this also could be telling us that we need to recognize those three crowns in others. And the Midrash Shmuel quotes from Rav Ovadia and Bartanura, one of the classic commentaries on the Mishnah, that there's these three crowns are all areas where the Torah itself instructs us to show honor, to show kavod to these people. So it says, "V'hadarta pnei zaken." You should you should respect, you should revere the face of the elderly, and but zaking is interpreted to mean zeh kana chachma, one who has acquired wisdom, a talmid chacham, that were to honor a Torah scholar. The Kohanim, we have a mitzvah, the Kidashto, you should sanctify him. And that's why we give the first aliyah to a Kohen, and we have a Kohen lead benching sometimes, depending on the circumstance. So there's a mitzvah we're actually not supposed to ask Kohanim to do work for us. So we're supposed to sanctify the Kohanim, treat them with special respect because of their special role. And finally, and finally, the king, Torah says, Som tasim alecha melech, you should place a king upon you. And it says alecha, upon you, that a maso alecha, his fear should be upon you. Again, we're commanded to treat a king with certain types, with special respect. However, he points out that it's only if they have a good name. He cites a story in the Gemara. The Gemara tells the story of a certain Kohen Gadol who he was leaving the Beis Hamikdash, and everybody was trailing him, giving him honor. He was the Kohen Gadol, and they wanted to escort him. They wanted to see him. And as they were walking, they saw two of the great sages, Shemaiah and Avtalion. Shemaiah and Avtalion, who are mentioned at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, part of the tradition of Torah. And when they saw Shemaiah and Avtalion, they kind of abandoned all these people that were following the Kohen Gadol. They abandoned the Kohen Gadol and started following Shemaiah and Avtalion. Now, the Kohen Gadol was not too pleased about this, that all this honor, and then all of a sudden the people turned away and started to honor the Shemaiah and Avtalion. Now, Shemaiah and Avtalion were descended from converts. I think they might have themselves been converts. They were certainly descended from converts, and I mean descended from Gentiles. They were descendants actually of Sancheiriv, of the king of Ashur. They were so the Kohen Gadol made some comment referencing their lineage, and he said to them, he called them like B'nai Amamin, descendants of other nations. When they were leaving, he kind of he said goodbye by referring to their lineage and saying, oh, children of other nations, have a nice day. That's how, and it was like a dig at them referencing their lineage. And they said back, the Gemara says that, let us go, we'll go in peace. We who conduct ourselves like Aaron, better than, even though we come from Sancheiriv, we come from Ashur, we're descended from Ashur, we'll go in peace, at least that we conduct ourselves like Aaron, as opposed to you, the descendant of Aaron, who doesn't conduct himself like Aaron. In other words, Aaron HaKohen is known also from Pirkei Avos as one who was Ohev Shalom Verodev Shalom. He loved peace, he chased peace. Ohev Asabrios, he loved people. He was a tremendous had tremendous respect for people, love for people. And here, this Kohen Gadol at that time didn't have respect for Shemaiah and Avtalion. And they said, we make descend from these other nations, but we conduct ourselves like Aaron. You descend from Aaron, and you don't conduct yourself like Aaron. So the idea was, and the reason why the Bartanura is bringing this story in, is that here you have someone who seemingly has the Keser Kahuna. He has the crown of Kahuna. He's the Kohen Gadol. He's the high priest. But he doesn't have a Keser Shem Tov. He doesn't really have a good name, meaning he doesn't conduct himself like someone who should be respected, and therefore was deserving that the people, instead of showing him the honor that they show Shemaiah and Avtalion, the honor instead. And the same is true for a Talmid Chacham. A person could be very learned, but if he doesn't act properly, then he's not to be respected. And the same is true for a king. If a king doesn't act properly, then he's not to be honored. So we have these three crowns, but they're only crowns um, if a person also has a Keser Shem Tov, also has a good name. We mentioned that the crowns correspond to the crowns around the vessels of the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, with the most holy obviously being the Ark, which is in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. That's the crown of Torah, and we are to pursue a crown of Torah, and we're to respect those who have these crowns. We have special mitzvos to respect each of these types, the Talmid Chacham, the Torah scholar, the Kohen, and a king, but only if they also maintain that Keser Shem Tov, that crown of a good name. Okay. Mishnah Yud Ches, Mishnah 18. Rabbi Nehorai Omer. Rabbi Nehorai said, have a golel limkom Torah. One should exile themselves to a place of Torah. Ve'al tomar shehitavo lacharecha. And don't say it will come after. One shouldn't say it will come after me. Shechaverecha yikaimua biyadecha. And for your friends will help maintain it or establish it in your hands. And don't lean on your understanding. That's a verse from Mishle, the last part. So Rabbi Norai said, one should exile themselves to a place of Torah. Don't say that it will come after you. Now, the next clause, it's not clear if this is something that one shouldn't say or it's a reason not to say. In other words, it could be we should read it, don't say that the Torah will come after me, because my friends will establish it. It needs that still needs to be interpreted, and we'll see there's different ways to read it. And don't lean on your understanding. Okay, what is this Mishnah teaching us? So first of all, Midrash Shmuel points out, it says you should exile yourself to a place of Torah. Why doesn't it say go to a place of Torah? Exile yourself? What's that telling us? So he says that it means run. Run, like you're being sent into exile to a place of Torah. Don't hesitate. Run to a place of Torah, to live in a place of Torah. Don't rely on, maybe a person maybe their father was a big Torah scholar and their grandfather was a big Torah scholar. So they might say, it will come naturally to me and it will just come to me. So he says it's not good enough. You have to be surrounded by Torah. That's the shechaverecha yikaimu biyadecha. It's only through friends that it will be established with you. It's only if you surround yourself with Torah types, with people who are investing in Torah. If a person just says it will come on its own, I don't need to live amongst Torah people. I can just I have it as an inheritance from my fathers and grandfather. It's not going to come on its own. A person has to surround themselves with Torah, with good influences, and otherwise it won't even be mekayim. In other words, the words the Mishnah says is chaverecha yekaimu aviyadecha. Your friends will uphold it, will make it permanent, is the translation here, which implies we're not even talking about learning more. We're talking about even holding on to what you have. Even just to hold on to what you have, a person needs to be surrounded by the proper Torah influences, and don't just rely on your don't just rely on your own understanding that you think on your own you'll be able to hold on to it. No, a person has to surround themselves with Torah influences. Otherwise, it's not gonna happen. And at times, a person, another way to add to the idea of exile, a person might have to leave the comforts of a good job or a good situation if the place that they're in is not a place of Torah, and even if it will be more difficult elsewhere, they need to put themselves in exile, so to speak. They have to put themselves into a, a more challenging situation sometimes in terms of livelihood, right? And this happens sometimes. A person lives in a certain place, they have a good job, etc., and either they aren't they maybe they didn't have Torah and they become they become they start to do tshuva, they start to return, and they need to find a community, and it might mean giving up a good job. Sometimes the person lives in a community that has Torah, and then the community kind of falls apart, and there's no longer Torah opportunities, there's no longer Torah influences in the community, and they also, even though it means giving up a good job or whatever it might be, a good situation, a nice house, but they would have to go find another place to live where there is Torah. Because otherwise it's not going to be maintained. If a person isn't surrounded by Torah influences, it won't be maintained. Don't think that it will come after you. He says, don't think you could just hire a rabbi, right? And this, he says something really important here. He says, let's say a person lives where there isn't a Torah community. They say, okay, I'll just bring in, I'll hire. Person has money, they can afford it. I'll bring in a rabbi to teach me. Says the Mishnah, says the Midrash Shmuel, that's not good enough. It's not one rabbi is not going to be able to influence and impact you. It's your friends. That's what's going to make a difference. That's the shechaverecha yekaimu yadecha. It's your friends who will uphold it in your hands. So he says sometimes you need to exile yourself to a place of Torah. Don't say it's going to come to me, meaning I could just hire a teacher, I could hire a rabbi, and then I'll have it, because it's chaverecha yekaimu yadecha. It's your friends, it's your community. That's really what upholds a person's spiritual state. So, of course, a good teacher, a good rabbi is important, but the main influences in many ways are the people, the friends that we surround ourselves with. I thought that was really a fascinating read of the Mishnah. Um, okay. And I guess just to close, one more way to learn this Mishnah is maybe speaking to the idea of a yeshiva, a seminary, a place where a person can be entirely engulfed with Torah learning. And again, this can't, it depends on the person's stage in life, but it could be a person can tap into it even in a regular community. But Midrash Shmuel quotes from some Moshe al-Mushnino, other commentaries, that a person should try to find a place where there's a real focus on Torah. And it doesn't say one should exile themselves to a place where there's a teacher, where there's a rabbi, right? It's not enough. It has to be a makom Torah, a place of Torah, a place where there's a real focus on learning and growing in Torah, and then if that's what the people around them are involved in, so then that's what will have the greatest influence on a person. And a person has to realize that naturally we go after the comforts of the world, we go after other pursuits, monetary pursuits. It's a battle, and to pursue Torah, and it won't come naturally if we don't surround ourselves with influences that will encourage us to learn Torah. Then the natural path would be to move away, and therefore one has to. That's why the Mishnah says, "Bigol l'makom Torah," surround oneself, go to a place of Torah where that's the culture, that's what people live and breathe. That's what can influence a person, and the Mishnah could be saying that don't say it will come on its own. Rather, it has to be something that a person pursues. It's because it doesn't come on its own. It has to be something that we seek. If we just sit back, it's not our natural tendency will be to seek other interests. So don't think it just comes after you. It's something that a person has to seek, and don't say that my friends will maintain it for me, because it's a person has to be responsible for themselves and pursue it on their own. So in this Mishnah, we said a number of things. We said, first of all, that a person, it says go lamakom Torah, it means either, which means to be exiled to a place. It means run to such a place, or it means, even if it means leaving some comforts, leaving a good job, but to find a place of Torah is of the essence, because it doesn't come, it's not going to come on its own. It has to be something that we seek. And don't think you could just import a rabbi, import a teacher, because really it's more than that. It's about the friends and the community that we surround ourselves with. And secondly, we said that uniquely, it could be that a makom Torah really is where there's a real focus on Torah around us, maybe in like a yeshiva or seminary type setting, or as much of that as we can get outside of that world. Because if that's not what people are focused on, if that's not the culture, then there's a natural tendency to move away from Torah. And so we always have to be trying to put ourselves in a place where that is the culture, and continue to seek it, because it's not going to come after us. The natural tendency is to move away. We have to constantly be seeking, be pushing ourselves to seek Torah learning opportunities, and not rely on others to kind of feed us the Torah, but rather we are responsible for ourselves. We have to push ourselves to find out those opportunities and to take advantage of them. Okay, we will hold there.
Well done. Thank you so much, Rabbi.